Is ADRAIN ZENZ. He's a German anthropologist, and he's the man behind a series of chilling revelations about Chinese policies in the autonomous Xinjiang region against the Uyghurs, a Muslim ethnic group. He's a senior fellow in China Studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundations, and he joins us from St. Paul in Minnesota. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Mr. ZENZ, you first reported on Uyghurs being forced into internment camps, which China says are, in fact, re-education camps. Earlier this year, you reported about forced labors. And in your latest revelations, published by the Jamestown Foundation in the US, you describe the birth control policies put in place in that region. But those are very, very harsh and drastic policies. Can you tell us what you found?
Yes, I firstly noticed that population growth and birth rates in the region of Xinjiang, but particularly in the Uyghur ethnic minority regions, had fallen dramatically. They declined up to 90%, in some cases up to 100% between 2015 and 2018, and were declining further in 2019. I found that this dramatic population decline is not just connected to the campaign of mass internment by where between 1 and 2 million Uyghur adults have been swept into so-called re-education camps, but I did find additionally significant evidence that birth prevention, the suppression of births, and even mass sterilization is a systematic government policy. The state has published documents that I was able to uncover that say that those who violate birth control are punished by being put into internment campaigns, that women are facing mandatory placements of intrauterine contraceptive devices into their uterus, so-called IUDs. And for 2 Uyghur counties, I uncovered shocking evidence of plans for mass female sterilization for 2019.
Right, because what you describe is quite horrific. Let's put it this way, is what those women have gone through, because it's not only a plan, it seems that it has been implemented. We're talking about mass sterilization policies that have been put in place and have had a drastic effect, as you said, on population growth and on the ethnic composition of the area, of course.
Yes. Unfortunately, this is apparently a wider game plan of ethno-racial supremacy by the central government in Beijing. Now, after the Mao Zedong's armies occupied the area in 1949, Mao Zedong sent millions of Han Chinese colonial settlers into the area, flooding them with a Han population. However, more recently, the Uyghur population growth had been stronger, and they had been outstripping population growth among the Han. So now the government is doing 2 things. Firstly, it is brutally suppressing Uyghur birth rates close to zero in many cases. And secondly, my analysis has shown that up to approximately 2 million additional migrants from Eastern China, almost all of them Han Chinese, have been lured to move to Xinjiang in the last 3 years by promises of lucrative government jobs, free housing, and even free land. So it's a policy of birth prevention of minorities coupled with a strategy of settler colonialism.
Would you use the word ethnic cleansing?
Ethnic cleansing is not the accurate term to use, because strictly defined, it means that a particular area is being cleansed of an ethnic group. I don't find this to be the case. Rather, the strategy here is one of ethnic mixing and dilution, meaning Han Chinese are encouraged to move in with the Uyghurs and surpass their population. I would, however, characterize it, tentatively at least, as a campaign of demographic genocide.
That's a very loaded word. Genocide is not a word one can use lightly. What do you mean by demographic genocide? A genocide is an actual genocide.
That is very true. The legal definition of genocide was set forth by the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in 1948. It has 5 criteria, any one of which is sufficient. to qualify an act as genocide if it intends to destroy a population in part or in whole. Now, one of these 5 criteria for genocide is the suppression of births of the targeted group. For this, we now have clear and systematic evidence. I do use the word demographic as a qualifier because I feel it's appropriate to qualify what is going on. However, the term demographic genocide is not a legal definition.
Right. Clearly, your data is the key. The Chinese media has accused you essentially of fabricating it. You claim that you're actually working on direct Chinese sources. Has that been the case for all your discovery, and how do you do it?
Yes. In fact, I started working with Chinese government data over 10 years ago for my PhD, and have been over time refining my methods and expanding my focus of research into very different forms of data. I analyze officially published Chinese statistical figures, yearbook data, recruitment documents, procurement documents, budgets and plans and reports, state media sources as well. I often have to use data in combination because the Chinese often are kind of trying to hide what they're doing. However, by piecing things together almost like a puzzle, I can often arrive at some very pertinent conclusions. Now, for this particular report, I was actually able to uncover smoking gun evidence, as you might want to say. Smoking gun evidence means specific target figures for sterilizing so many thousand women in particular areas, and it's stated as a mandatory target.
Right. As I mentioned, the Chinese media has accused you of being an enemy, a far-right Catholic firebrand, a U.S. intelligence asset. There are even threats in the official Chinese media of suing you for libel. Why have you become such a controversial person for China?
I've become a very big problem for Beijing because my research uncovers an atrocity, one of the greatest ongoing human rights violations of the 21st century. And in my evidence, I rely on Beijing's own documents, which it cannot refute. Now, the Chinese most recently have actually tried to argue that some of my calculations are wrong by misrepresenting them, by not performing the same calculation, but by leaving out one of the things I did, etc., by misrepresenting my work. But their main focus is to try to have an ad hominem attack on me it's called a character assassination attack, by questioning my motives. Because the thing is, China is desperate. Beijing is desperate because of my findings. What else are they going to do? They feel they have to now go on the offensive.
Are you scared about a lawsuit or maybe something even darker in terms of threats? Have you been receiving some pretty direct threats because of your work?
I have not received direct threats outside of what Chinese state media and the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs have said. However, these threats already are entirely unprecedented. Beijing has never issued any such threats against a foreign academic and researcher. Now, I'm not so concerned about the lawsuit because the laws are decidedly in my favor. I've looked into it, and I think the probability of Beijing engaging in any successful lawsuit against me are extremely slim.
Right.
I am, however, taking the more indirect threats that they have issued quite seriously, and I am, in fact, today, after this interview, I am, in fact, meeting up with the local FBI here in Minnesota.
What do you think of the world's reaction? We've seen, obviously, escalating tensions and accusations between the U.S. and China, U.S. officials having referred to your work. We've seen France, quite unusually, criticize China because of the latest revelation and ask for some neutral observers to be allowed into Xinjiang. Do you think something is changing in terms of where Europe is standing and maybe other countries?
I see a slow change, yes. The first change came in the debate when the China cables were released at the end of last year, because more than anything else, they so bluntly and directly proved what these so-called quote-unquote vocational internment camps are really about, that they run like high-security prisons. I started to see a real shift in the debate after these leaked documents were published last year, also in Europe. However, now, with my most recent research, now the word genocide is being used because one of the genocide criteria has now been met. This is now, again, shifting the debate to a new level, and I'm very happy to see that in some countries, this is now becoming more aware. Society is becoming more aware, and unfortunately, it has to be bottom up. Unfortunately, why? You know, it's the people, the intellectuals, the lower level members of parliament, lower level, mid-level politicians, they're starting to speak up. Now, finally, France's foreign ministry has spoken up. But why not before? And why not the presidents? Why not Macron? Why not Merkel?
They're afraid of China?
I believe they are intimidated. They are hedging their bets because their constituencies, their voters in France, in Germany, they want jobs, right? They want economic security. I'm afraid that our politicians, our leaders are still prioritizing our own self-interest over the dire human rights situation of other people, which I find very unacceptable.